That's what I want to talk today about is how I've used Ansible in the past, or how other people have used Ansible in the past that I found out about. Basically, you guys come every day and tell us how do we use Ansible this or this other way. And I thought it was interesting because not everybody thinks of Ansible the same way, and this is what brought me to this presentation. As you've already been told, I'm a core maintainer of Ansible right now. I've been a contributor to Ansible for almost 2.5 years, I think, but employed by Ansible for the last 8 months. Before that, I've done all kinds of jobs. I've been help desk, I've been app support, programmer, analyst, QA, been all over the place. I've been a DBA, release manager. A friend a few years back said, no, you're a tech janitor. You just go in, mop up whatever the problem is, fix it, leave it nice and clean, and then yell at people if they dirty it again. So that stuck. I like that. I've had titles, actual business cards with an asterisk, or even director of subversion. That was a joke of me putting Git everywhere. So I've been around a lot of the industry and seen everything used many ways, and I'm happy to see that Ansible is almost as flexible as I am. It can do almost any job if you put it to. We don't mean Ansible to do every job. It can. It's not always the best thing for the job, but sometimes you're in a tight spot, you have what you know, you have it here, you have it fast, and you run with it. Ansible itself, a lot of people give it different names. Configuration management, release management, automation, orchestration system, distributed batch executor. For me, it's always been a reduction. Ansible just runs a task on a host. And then you can multiply that because it's n tasks on n hosts. And very simple, but incredibly powerful paradigm. And taking that into account, it's very easy to see how far you can take this or how little you need to do anything. One of the biggest things I started using right away in Ansible, being a guy that had been doing a lot of shell, both POSIX, bash isms, and years ago Corn shell, is that you have all these little scriptlets you always use. You're used to them, you know them. Ansible allows you to reuse them, and allows them to reuse them almost immediately. One thing Ansible is, it is a batch system, so you can't do interactive scripting across 500 machines. If you really need to do that, CSH, PSSH is good enough, but you need a pretty big screen to handle 300-400 machines. So I would recommend that if you're configuring 10 machines at the same time, you're okay, big screen, little windows. But if you want to configure 1,000 machines, do it in a batch way. It's also better for you not to be typing things when you're affecting several hundred machines. It's better to have it typed, tested on 2 or 3, and then run it on the 100. Ansible started out as a Unix tool. And it is a Unix tool, even though now supports Windows, and a lot of people use it as a framework or even as a programming API. It plays well with other Unix tools, and I'll show you soon how. Whatever you're doing in one place, Ansible just lets you leverage its transport over SSH or anything else, common tools you used to use before, and it just multiplies the utility of whatever you did before. Output, that depends. I used to have a custom callback plugin that would put everything in tab delimited files because I was a big user of the NoSQL database. Not the NoSQL everybody knows. It's a tab delimited database that you use awk to query. Look it up, the original NoSQL. Ansible is very friendly with JSON and YAML. The -t option for the ad hoc command creates per host JSON files with all the JSON structures so you can reuse them. And I found this to be very useful for certain things or for certain quick hacks to get stuff out of the way. Let people, you've got the data now, I'll do something prettier, more robust, better later on, like almost every shell script I've ever written and is still running in production 20 years later. This is a hack, the 5 minutes. Get out of my way, let me do the final product. So this is actually one such hack. I started working at this web shop. And the main complaint, well, there were several complaints. One, the website was slow, this and that. But one complaint in marketing is that our click-through was horrible, especially on Tuesdays. Our click-through was horrible. I said, well, we do release Tuesday morning. So let me see if there's something. So I came up with this little gem to parse Nginx logs and check HTTP error codes for the existence of the log. The logs were rotated daily, so I could see during the day the error logs. And this is actually the after logs, mostly 200s, some redirects, some 404s, but mostly the good stuff. When I ran this at first, we had about 4,000 or 5,500 errors. And I said, well, okay. Then I realized that on Wednesday's release, because of course we also had to re-release Wednesday because Tuesday, and then on Thursday's release to fix the Wednesday's release, these numbers would go down, and then our click-throughs would go up. So I started showing this to the marketing guys, is like, can you guys listen to what I was saying about, the release process needs to be a bit better. We actually need to let the QA people do their job. And I showed them that the times that we would release without errors, without 500s appearing in this, our click rates would stay. And they were all very happy with this. Okay. But now I'm getting 10 emails a day saying, can you send me the report? Can you send me the report? Can you send me the report? Click rates are down. It must be the 500s. Can you send me the report? Click rates are up. The 500s must be gone. I said, they've been gone for 3 weeks. Leave me alone. So, sometimes this little hack you did to prove a point, now suddenly everybody wants it. So this is what I did. It says procmail here. I translated it, but to tell you the truth, it used to be a qmail file. Even worse than what you're seeing here. So I created a procmail rule that if you were sending a subject with 500 reports, and it was normally rare from the first email I already sent, and it was a huge chain letter with every report already sent back and forth, you could have the whole history of the company report just by getting at any point of that chain letter. And then I created a little playbook that just took my little shell thing and did a mail to the environment variable that I was setting from procmail and mailed to that person. So now every morning when I got in and I had 4 emails waiting from marketing since 6 a.m. because they need to see the 500s, turn off my machine, I go for my bagel, then the marketing guys come to, do you have the report? Do you have the report? Should be in your email now. So it's just, first thing I do. My machine boots up, reads the email, is sending these out, and during the day, they keep getting sent immediately as soon as they happen, live reporting immediately. 3 weeks later, I'm setting up Graphite, nice log aggregation, and here you have the 500s on big screen. People still ask me the freaking report. But this is Ansible helping me going to first 5 machines, then 20, then 35, then 10 again when I fixed all the problems of scaling. And very easy got people off my back. It's not everybody. I remember telling Michael Dehan at the time, he says, what are you doing? What the hell are you doing? He did that a lot with me. And it surprised him. And he said, no, it makes perfect sense. I created a Unix tool. You're using it as a Unix tool. You're calling it from another Unix tool. And you're leveraging existing tools to do the work faster and better. That's what Ansible was all about. Ansible itself leverages sudo, su, ssh, tools you already used. Now I'm using Ansible as one of those tools I leveraged from somewhere else. Another thing that I started doing with Ansible that, again, Michael saying, what the hell are you doing? Was what Ansible strives not to be is a programming language. It tries very hard to be a very declarative language to get this done. I started creating small scripts and small binaries I would give people to, hey, execute this. And they were executing playbooks. They didn't know why. I'm not using a shell wrapper, and you'll see why in a second. When I needed interactive, I just used var's prompt. When I needed batch, they could pass -e and variables and whatever. Later on, the ability to use a JSON file as input was added. I never used that, but you know, it's a nice feature to have. You can even use the pause module for in the middle of things. This I did in a release script. Here you release to the first servers. Are you sure you want to take them out of rotation? Yes, boom. Hit it, next. And I used a very simple trick that if you look at the first line, my playbook is executable, and the shebang is Ansible Playbook. And now you just write your playbook, and people, as long as they're authorized and everything else is in place, they can just run your playbooks and not know what it is. This is departed. I created this because an HR lady was bothering IT saying that she needed to be the one verifying people left the company and the users were out. And I'm saying, I'm not going to teach you how to take users out of every machine. So I created this little script for her that would create a report. She had the ability to edit the departed file. A small sample of that is just a list of usernames. So the file would get loaded, and then the user module would just go with items on the list of departed users, absent, and remove directory, yes. If she edited the file, somebody new left, she would expect it changed, because, you know, Ansible is very nice and reports, okay, 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 changed. And if she wanted to audit at any time, here it is. This is the only thing she knew how to execute in the command line. I had to teach her how to open a command line. I had to teach her. We made a macro so she would SSH directly into the management box, and she could execute this and see her report. But here's Ansible being used as a programmer. I created a small script, and I'm letting anybody use it without actually even knowing what's in it. This is a bit more complicated version. This was the release script. As I mentioned before, var's prompt and pause are very good at this point. This was actually made for a QA team, so they could release, and they could release any app, any version, and go through the steps, and we would ask, want to take this out of rotation? Yes, no. A normal release that you normally would do from your upside, but now you want to give it to people that really don't know how to use the command line or really don't know how to do much else, but can follow simple instructions. You prompt them for those instructions. Playbook does the rest. You make it executable, and you put a shebang. Now Ansible is your programming language. And let me stress this, Ansible is not a programming language. But you can use it as such. And here's the important part. You already have roles or task lists that do certain things. This gives you a 5-minute way to create a playbook and allow other people to leverage that. If you want to give your developers the ability to restart the Apache servers, you can just do that. Give them the handler, go at it. You can't do anything else. You can run this executable. This executable will actually go to all the other machines through sudo, read the root key because you don't have access. And now you've given everybody the ability to restart Apache. This example was a lot more involved. It was the release script in the end. In the end, I ended up teaching the QA people how to use Ansible and how to write playbooks, but this was a good introduction and easy way to just pawn off to other people the work you don't want to do anymore. Now I can go and do automate other stuff. Now the QA people don't have to go to me or to the other people on the ops team to, can we release this app? Can we release that? It's all theirs. And it's all theirs without them really having to have a lot of knowledge. Now for, you know, brownie points, now you give them a web GUI and a button, tower. As I was saying, I taught the QA people how to use and write Ansible. But why is this? Because I also started using Ansible as a QA tool. Ansible can do things and can set states on machines, but it can also go to the same machines and ask what that state is. If this file needs to be owned by root, I can go as a again and say, is this file owned by root? Sometimes the same playbook that you use to create things is the one that you run in check mode or diff mode and see if it's changed anything. Or even better, you run it as a non-privileged user, and if there's any change, it's going to fail because you don't have permissions. This is great for QA. This is the state our application needs to be in. They just run it. If they see anything red, they complain to the developer. They don't even need to know anything that's happening. The developer needs to see what went wrong. He can run the same playbook again. Okay, this is what's failing. This is what I did wrong. Or no, the ops guy messed up. You know, but you got an easy way to verify things without having to have the expertise on what those things are. Also, you can create a specific QA or testing playbooks with the fail and assert modules. They're there for once you gather information, you can do comparisons and say, I will fail if this is not true, or if it's true, or if these series of things are true or not. And this is for an example of checking that our, I forget, Tomcat app was deployed. So QA actually wrote this. I paraphrased it a bit from the original. But basically, it checked that the app user was present, install on the box, that the directory, the scratch directory for the app was owned by that user and writable by that user, that the service for the app, or the services for the app, actually no, this is Nginx, MicroWSJ, this was a Flask app. The services needed for the app are up and running. You can check that the service is up and running without having the ability to start them. And then from the app servers, you could check connectivity using the Postgres user to the database. So this way, you ensure that every server that is supposed to access the database, from that server, you're connecting to the database as the user. Database is up, you can connect, and the user's authorized. All this you can do with Ansible, and this is not changing anything. It's just verifying that everything is what you want it to be. So this is a Tomcat one, I'm sorry. This is checking that the app is running correctly. Less invasive than the other one. The other one will fail when things have changed because your permissions are not there. This one, for example, uses stat to check that the jar is there. And it registers that data, and then you assert that the checksum is the checksum you expect. I store the checksum in console at that time. You can store it in a flat file anywhere else, or keep it in a var. You input, it could be compared to the file you have here, or you can go to Maven Artifactory, check that file, compare that it is the version that it's supposed to be there. Then I also stat that the PID for that process is running. I wait for the port 8080 to be responsive, normal Tomcat port. I do a URI request, and by default, this app was supposed to return app1 OK, or actually it was server name OK, and I can match that regex. So here's a playbook that does nothing except check. The previous playbook could be used both by the guy creating the permissions for the user or the services, or the QA guy. This is a pure QA playbook. It only checks that the application works. Now you have Ansible both as a deployment tool and a QA tool that can verify both the deployment and the app itself. Ansible can also be used as an audit tool. And if you see, this is almost the exact same slide as QA. Auditing is very much similar to QA. You don't test functionality as much. You do test, for example, permissions. You do test that things are a certain patch level. You do test that certain security holes do not exist. One thing I liked about the recent Venom, Heartbleed, and others is that people came up with playbooks right away that tested these vulnerabilities. Now you could take that and test against all your machines. Very easy, if they're vulnerable or not, in parallel. So this was for a firewall audit. Very simple. Port 80 and 443 should be accessible from an outside host. We had an outside host in one cloud provider and in another just to be able to test our main data center. So Ansible would go to that host, try to get to our main website address on port 80 and 443. We know our firewall is configured. We were running a, as most people are, a network appliance. They are now getting to a point that they are very configurable. And if you really want to see really cool stuff, talk with James Edmonton. I'm sorry, I'll always get your name right. One of these days, I'll get your name right. He's doing really cool stuff with using Ansible to automate networks, automate network devices, and make all this a thing of the past. But at this time, we had our network admin go in, upload a file, click 3 GUIs. Now it's configured. Yeah, but I don't want to check manually. This is what happened. I created a playbook that he could run automatically and go to our data centers, go to our test and pilot servers outside of our data centers, and check that things were what they expected to be. After he's reconfiguring our devices manually, but we are checking them automatically. And the second check is actually the contrary. It's a negative check of the wait for. This is where the failed when comes into play. It reverses the fail condition. So if I cannot get to port 80 or 443, this is actually, I'm sorry, if I cannot get to ports between 1 and 1024, with the exception of 80 and 443, because I'm only executing when the item is not 80 or 443. This is basically a poor man's port scan. And as a little koala says, or you could just use Nmap, but this is a way to demonstrate you can do this in Ansible. I'm not saying you should do it in Ansible. And it's a very small example. If you want to see really cool stuff about even checking which switch is connected to which switch through CDP or LLDP discovery, again, James, I need to get your name right and have somebody else say it. I was in the New York meetup 2 days ago. Very impressed with what he did. He's brought network administration almost to where computer administration is using Ansible, and he's created tons of modules for this. And this is basically a baby step to what he's doing now that's way more advanced. And here's another thing that I created the find module, but this was before using a shell example of find. And this is a poor man's intrusion detection system. Basically, find goes to a path, takes all the files there, compares them, looks for anything that has changed in the last day, and fails if, fails if anything has changed in that day. I register, and if the array of registered things, of items, is greater than 0, I should fail. If it's different than 0, I should fail. Then, this is a cut from a playbook. There's an ignore errors that's missing here. But then you can also assert and look at any of the files and look at if their checksums are different, or look if their M times are different, or their owners are different. Again, this is 5 minutes. You get an intrusion detection system up and running. Your boss leaves you alone, and now you can go and install Osiris, A, Tripwire, the real stuff. But this shows you interesting uses that I've seen of Ansible. This was actually a user was coming up to me is, how can I do this? I said, no, don't do this. But how can I do this? Well, if you press me, and we ended up with this thing, which surprised me, because then we ended up with even, here's how you save the database of the changes, and we use a symlink to get to the latest, and now you can report across this whole thing. And I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this? Just use Tripwire, leave me alone. But, you know, you can do it. You can do it. And in a pinch, you can have this up in 10 minutes from one machine without installing anything anywhere. And it is helpful. It's not as good as the products. It's not a signed database. Oh, wait, I can add that. No, Stop, stop. Just download a role to install 8, Osiris, Tripwire, or any other, whichever one you like. There might be others. These are the 3 that I'm familiar with. That's why I put them there. Hello Kitty agrees with me. Just use those. And a very interesting one. This is actually from a user. This is you just saw this, that they're adding it in Tower, but this is how one of our users implemented it. When we brought out fact caching in the previous version, we announced the Redis one, and I sneaked in last minute the JSON file fact caching, because it's how I originally developed the fact caching before I abandoned it. Michael took it over, he abandoned it, and this third guy took it over, he actually did it, and then we integrated it, and then we added the Redis plugin. So I had the JSON file plugin, and it took me like 5 minutes, I'll add it back. 2 weeks later, I get this guy saying, hey, how can I do this, and that? What the hell are you doing? So he's checking out. He sets fact caching to use JSON file. He points that to a Git repo he has open. He's got Incron looking at that Git repo, and every time he sees a change, he checks it in. So now he's got in a repo all the history of changes of all his facts. Very easily done. In the background, and every time somebody runs a playbook, he gets it for free. The problem was when we added time facts, that now the diff started showing all the times, but then he added a commit hook to filter out the time facts, and he was happy again. But again, Tower is doing this soon. It's not only doing it on facts, it's doing it on many other things. It does specific scans. A nice report, give to your boss. You don't need to do this yourself. This also would require that everybody executes Ansible from the same machine, with this, permissions that let you write to the same fact cache, which starts getting more complicated. This was one guy managing 200 machines by himself. He was happy. This gave him exactly what he needed. Again, something you can use Ansible for becomes an auditing system automatically as a side effect. This is something that I've never actually finished with Ansible. I've had it at partial stages of working. Ansible managed is something that a lot of people like to have in templates. The problem is that if you put in user date time, every time you run the template, it's changed because you're running at a different time, at least, I hope. And sometimes you run as different users because it could be me, it could be him, it could be the other guy in ops. And suddenly we're always changing this file. So one thing that I had learned from an ETL system we had been in a previous company is that it's hard, especially when you're doing ETL across a lot of clients, to keep the information of a file with a file. So we had the import specs we would figure out of a file. We tried to keep them time version, but then a client would send us a file 6 weeks later with the version of the import from before, so we couldn't do a time series. It got pretty complicated. So I learned about extended attributes, and hell, I'll just keep the spec in the extended attributes of the file. And I started doing the same thing with changes to config files in Ansible. So I would create a handler with this extended attribute, which would go to whatever file you had modified. So now I could keep who did what when, and even a hash of what the file is supposed to look like last time it was touched. It has the disadvantage of not being immediately visible when you edit the file or when you ls the file, but it's easy enough if you know that this is happening. Just doing a get f attribute or lsf attribute depends on the tools on your system. It also requires extended attributes on the user mount. And the great thing, now your template and your copy don't detect the file has changed, because the extended attributes are not part of the sum of the file. The checksum of the file is not affected by them, which is why I also kept another checksum about the extended attributes, but that's another issue. And you can basically write them in JSON, and they look like JSON because it's basically the same structure. Curly braces for dictionaries and then lists. One last thing is Ansible itself internally is built as a Unix tool. It has all these plugins. It puts them all together to create a result. Changing the plugins from underneath gives you different powers. If you change SSH for Paramico, now you can deal with old Sun machines, because old Sun SSH does not really like the open SSH with the control master, and you get weird things. You need to go against a Windows machine, you use WinRM, even though now they just added SSH, which means all the time we spent on WinRM. Let's see where that goes. That you want to access a jail, we've got a communication plugin for that. But now it's not about the communication, but or the communication you get back. Your callback plugins, you want to display it to a person, it's one plugin. You want to display it to a system, you can give it into JSON or tab delimited files, as I said before. You can play around with the output, and that is part of a plugin. It works a lot like pipes and filters. There's stuff that goes in, vars plugins, inventory. In your inputs, your transformations, your modules, which you all know, the hundreds of modules we have now to do almost anything you can think of. And then the small things like lookups, filters for transformations, or getting new information into your playbook that are piecemeal at any point. And the nice thing about Jinja filters, you can also chain them. They're pipeable within themselves. Callbacks are, I think, a type of plugin that is really underrated. They're very powerful, and they are basically your event manager, if you want it. Anything you do in the play, it gets sent into to a callback when it happens. Notification modules are kind of a lesser form of callback. You saw before, I'm running the report and sending mail. Or when I saw that a file was different, I record that fact and send the mail that, hey, the files have changed. With callbacks, I could be sending all the information all the time. With notification modules, it's chosen events that you can send. And one last part is a lot of people don't know the many ways of executing a module, or that the module you're executing can be dynamic. This is one thing that a lot of people have used for abstraction, specifically Ansible Package Manager, so you don't have to use apt, yum, or whatever else. But it has its limitations, because not all the package managers do the same thing. I'm going to give an example on how to, for example, install Apache with PHP. And there's other things that a lot of people ask from us that are not built in, but that are very easy to build in. This is a role I've created. I get asked this a lot. Hey, how can I make sure that in a directory, only the files I created are there? With other configuration management systems, you know, we compile all this data about the machine, and of course they know everything that should be there. But with Ansible, it's a lot more freeform. I'm updating 3 of the configuration files in this play, you're updating in that play. You might have all that data in your vars, but Ansible does not have a holistic view of the machine. You can give it to Ansible, and that's how I created this little role. This role runs find on the path you give it, registers all the files. It then goes to each file and deletes every file that it finds existing there that is not in the expected files. So there's a variable tidy expected that I pass into this role, and this is a list of files you should have. It goes to the path. These are the files I have. So every file I have that is not that I should have, file deletes. And then I send an email, and the body is the list of files I removed. And this is a role. Now you have that tidy function. Everybody who's asking for me, you only have to give it 2 things. The path to the directory that you want to keep tidy, and the list of files that should be there. A lot of people wanted to make a module. I said, you know what? It's basically calling 2 modules, find and file. And then you might want to do something with that. You can add a mail, you can send to HipChat, you can send to Snapchat, you can send whatever chat you want to do, IRC, Jabber. There's all kinds of places you can send it to, DevNull. That's where they all end. And this takes me to hacking Ansible. You don't really need to code. You can look at the roles as a small way to add functionality. You can add them like they're little programming libraries, which you give 2 inputs, and then things happen. You either get something back or some effects happen. In this case, I give 2 inputs. This is a path. This is the files that should be there. This little role takes care of removing what should not. This is something that I found very interesting, a callback. This is a user came and said, oh, we want to do this. We want to have Ansible, instead of sending to syslog in normal lines, as Ansible does, we wanted to send to JSON lines, because they had a whole setup of their syslog ng would accept JSON, and anything that was a JSON message would be resent to their aggregation server. So that's very interesting. Let's talk on how to do that. So they created this small logger plugin. This is actually included with Ansible, I think, in the last 2 versions. And it basically, everything that happens in Ansible that goes to the callback that you would output to screen is now a JSON message getting sent to syslog. This is sending it to syslog. You can send it to Elastic Cache. You can change it. You can send it to an RRD. You can send it via Whisper protocol. You can send it anywhere where you want to aggregate the data. This is basically reporting and auditing built in. This has always been in Ansible. Most people have only used it to see in their screen. I mean, there's one to send every action that happens in a playbook to HipChat. You can send it to Slack. You can email every playbook that's ever run, because that's what we need, more email that we're not going to read. I used to work for a spammer. It's a really sore point with me. And this little plugin just demonstrated one of the really undervalued things. These guys wanted all this information. They wanted to build in a system themselves. They wanted to correlate the information of Ansible running with what their application was giving them. They already had a system in place, syslog, transporting JSON. Other people might have opinions on that. I don't. It works for them. And this little plugin made it very easy for them to integrate Ansible. Again, Ansible doesn't care. I'm sending output to a plugin. The plugin can do whatever you tell it to do. And this is a more fun plugin. This one was actually been in Ansible for a long time. This callback plugin will go to your Mac and speak to you on every step of the play. It uses the say utility. I don't know if you all know it on the Mac. And for example, it will tell you the name of the play you're going to run. When something is okay, it does a beep sound. When it fails, it it wails. When everything is okay, it goes pew. And a very fun thing with this, Michael Dehan, he's got this Ansible and Juliet. It's basically a small, the first 3 chapters of Romeo and Juliet that go against an inventory. You map that inventory to 5, 6 max, you've got the best April Fool's pranks ever, because now your machines start playing the different parts. Your machine is Romeo, his is Juliet, Parsec, and now you've got to play, and everybody in the office is like, what's going on? That you're doing this with OSXA, that you do this to a lava lamp, that you do this to an LED and stream information. Possibilities are endless. We find the most ridiculous way of using it, go at it. Ansible doesn't care. It'll do whatever you tell it to. Just give it the plugin. It'll recite Romeo and Juliet just because you asked it to. No judgments. And the last thing is, because I'm very surprised most people don't know this, there's several ways to call a module. The first form, I think, is the least used, is that you have the action, and inside action you have module, and to module you give the module name. Almost nobody uses this because it's a lot of typing. So Michael introduced a shorthand, which was action module name, which a lot of people still found too much typing. So everybody just does module name colon, with one exception, when you want to use local action. And then you remember, hey, wait, there's this action we add again. And that's why you sometimes see everything module name, module name, and then local action colon module. But it's really the same way of expressing, of calling a module. It's just that we're so used to the shorthand, we don't see that there's other ways. But these other ways actually enable us to use a variable. I was actually a very big fan of this when Ansible still did the $variable notation, which made it work much better. Now that we have the curly braces, YAML gets a bit frisky about it. And here it is, for example, this will install Apache on any architecture that supports a package manager that takes a name and state present. This works with yum, apt, I believe package ng, and portage. I really haven't tested with anything else. It takes a list of packages, which is a variable. I use include vars to include the distribution appropriate variables that I'm going to use. And then I template the config, which also uses paths to a distribution appropriate place. A lot of people ask for this all the time, and I keep telling them it's just as much work. You end up with 3 files, but this is the way to, if you want to do it, because the data you're looking at as code, remember, this is a YAML file. It's a data expression. Ansible just happens to interpret that data into actions, which reminds me of Lisp and Scheme, but your code is data. It's always been data. Ansible just uses a data format to force you to express the code in it. And I keep telling you it's not a programming language. So this is the Red Hat file, which, for example, as you saw before, the configuration had to use an Apache user because it's different on different distributions. Red Hat uses HTTPD as a user. For the config, it uses etc HTTP, conf HTTPD. And the packages are completely named differently. Well, they're named HTTPD, mod SSL, PHP FPM, and the service is also named HTTPD. When we go to Debian, there's not one thing the same. If you're not using the abstract, you would need to have a apt install with the packages, a yum install with the packages, 2 files, and then a variable file for the common data. In this case, I restructured the other way around. Instead of having 2 task lists or 2 plays, I have 1 play and I have 2 data files. But I can give you what a lot of people ask for, which is abstraction when it comes to the package manager. One caveat is that if you do the configurations also the same, which you can up to a point, as long as you keep them monolithic, you break the Debian Apache control tools, because they expect the wholly organized, symlinked configurations. But that's up to you. It's your context. You want this, you can have it, but remember you asked for it. And just a small recap on everything. Ansible was born from Unix, plays well with Unix. Remember this, you will find uses that nobody else has thought of. I had a patch to make Ansible accept plays in standard in, and that was promptly rejected several times. Then I stopped generating plays on the fly from Ansible to Ansible, but that was my own insanity. But otherwise, it works very much like a Unix tool. It's a Python script in the end. You can call it, and there's several ways to pass data into it. It can pass data out in several ways. The plugins allow you for enormous flexibility at this point. Roles are not only for a set of tasks that you're looking at, it can be for subsets of that, or use them as libraries, programming libraries. The tidy role I just showed you, you can add that anywhere very easily just to make that function. If you make them small, composable, they become very, very reusable. A lot of people want to code in the Playbook. I've seen this n number of times. Why can't I write Python here? Because it's not a programming language, and yet I keep using it as one. You've all seen it. I've admitted to it, and I deny it all the time. It's not a programming language. It's that way for a reason. Ansible is very simple to audit, very simple to use, very simple to ramp up. If we convert it into a programming language, it loses that simplicity. So what happens with all these programmers that want to add code to Ansible? Well, this is where the plugins are great. Because now you can add the code, do the functionality you wanted, and make it in a reusable component that a non-programmer can use. Every lookup plugin, every filter you add, adds to the power of Ansible. It makes it do what the code would do it, but people don't have to look at the code or copy and paste it to actually use it. They don't have to import libraries. They don't have to code themselves. They can just use Ansible, write it into a playbook, hide the code where it has to be in the plugins. It's a good place for them. They interact very well with everything else. There should be very little that you cannot do using the plugins that you need to do. Every time I say plugins, 99% of people think task modules, library. There are other plugin classes that are very interesting. Specifically, filters, lookbacks, and callbacks are incredibly powerful. They control your inputs, your outputs, and your transformations. This is 80 to 90% of what a programming language does. You input stuff, you transform it, you output. This is what these plugins are meant for. The library plugins are meant to do actions across other machines and create state. These are not. These are meant to take information, transform it, output information. That's the biggest difference between the rest of the plugins. And basically, Ansible can work for you. Just because I tell you not to do it that way does not mean you can't. If it works for you, makes your life easier, makes your company work better, go ahead and do it. Let me cry in a corner about how you're mistreating Ansible. It's not my hangups you need to deal with. It's your circumstance. You see many examples of using Ansible in unorthodox ways, ways that people normally don't use. Little tricks. I think the shebang surprises most people. Nobody thinks of this, and this for me was like the first thing I did. And I'm like, no, really, it's that easy. Even Michael was like, yeah, what the hell are you doing? He does that a lot with me. Using it as a QA tool and an audit tool, it's a tool. How you use it, where it's best to use it is up to you. There's recommendations I can give you. There's recommendations anybody can give you. And it all depends if you have a better tool for the job or not. Or sometimes it's just the fast tool because this is a tool you know. This is a tool very easy to pick up. This is a tool that almost anybody can pick up in a fraction of the time. Again, I have HR people and QA people that had no idea how to use a command line that are now using Ansible to deploy their applications, verify their applications, ensure compliance with users not being in the company. It's something that I love about Ansible. It's so easy, deceptively so sometimes. It can get very complicated, but that's you making it complicated. Basically me making it complicated. I'm just projecting. And that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Thanks, Brian. Any questions? Questions? Okay, great. So we are going to have, thanks, Brian. We're going to have a